Hi everyone. I'm really pleased to see all of you there today and welcome. We're going to actually start this talk with a series of my artworks, which you'll just see roll on the screen. It was too difficult to be able to actually have the images behind me flashing up. It becomes very complicated. So we decided that we'd actually just give you a taster of some of the artwork. And at the moment, you can actually just see some images in my studio, things that I'm working on at the moment, and ideas that I'm creating a new body of work with. But then we're going to run through a whole series of images. It will just be about a minute or two to give you a taster of the work that I make. Some of you will know it, some of you won't know it. Might be the first time you've seen my work. And then I'm going to give you an insight into some of the projects that I've worked on. So thanks very much for joining us today. In my studio together, and so we're actually live screening onto my Facebook page. So we're trying to just capture the images that are coming up on the computer just at the moment, and any texts are just messages that are coming in from people who are watching live. You won't be hearing any voices at the moment because we're just giving people a chance to have a look at some of the images that are on the screen before we actually start, before I start talking about the work. It's just to give you a flavour of what's going round. So you definitely won't have any volume at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
So that's actually the last of the images from the slideshow. And I felt that it probably was necessary to just give you a little bit of a sense of what my work is about, and through a visual context. If anybody's watching who is visually impaired, I apologize that there wasn't any captioning during the slides as they were going through. It was going to be too fast. For anybody who's not quite so aware of audio description captioning, it's obviously explaining the images for anybody who can't see properly. And some of you will know that I have lost a huge amount of my eyesight. So it would quite often be the case that I would require captioning to be able to see properly. As I say, it would be something that would normally be there, but not in this particular context today. So welcome if you haven't seen any of the images so far. And I know that some of you will obviously have seen my images. So as you all know, I'm an artist, a visual artist. I always called myself a visual artist, and I'm also a performance artist. I began my artistic career really in the theatre as opposed to in a studio like this today. I trained as a method actor, went to one of the London drama schools, trained for 3 years in method acting, and then I launched into a career as an actress. But since I was born, I have a chronic lung condition. My twin sister and I inherited it, something that's gone through our family. And I was resuscitated many, many times as a child. And because of that, and then becoming an actor, my lung condition started to really deteriorate. And I was really aware that this constant acting, touring all the time was having a very debilitating effect on my health. And I'd always drawn. I don't really know why I drew, because I didn't come from an artistic family. You know, our parents never took us to art galleries. My twin is a classical musician, so obviously there was some artistic background, but we weren't brought up in a way that we were aware of art. But I had always been very creative and very imaginative, and I began creating artwork. And I think it was Tim, my husband, said to me one day, "Oh my goodness me, this is how you have to spend the rest of your life. This is what you should be doing," you know. And I decided that I would pursue an art career. I went to art college actually when I was 30, having had quite a commercial art starting point, where I did very commercial work, sold work to hotels, very decorative flower pictures. But I knew that I wanted to say something more. And not that flower pictures don't say a huge amount, but I wanted to try and understand what I was trying to say. You know, what mattered to me? Why did I want to be an artist? And as creators, and I know most of the people here are very creative people, you know, there has to come a point where you have to try and work out what that is. And for me, going to art college was possibly a way of discovering what I could say or how I could say it. So I went to art college, and in between a BA and an MA course, I studied anatomy. And probably that was the really big turning point for me. You know, when you're resuscitated, you're very, very conscious of, one, your own survival, and also, you know, what it means to be alive. And I haven't necessarily been terrified. It's happened to me on numerous occasions, or many occasions, but it's just made me understand how precious every breath is. And I think ultimately, that is really what all my work is about. And you see very clearly in my drawings, there's a real sense of anatomy. What I didn't know when I actually went and studied anatomy, I drew at the University College Hospital Medical School. It was an art course that was run at the time specifically for artists to be able to draw from cadavers and learn anatomy in the same way as Leonardo da Vinci did. I had no idea at that point that I was going to lose an awful lot of my sight. But by learning that anatomy then, I know what the body is. I understand every single joint of the body and how the body moves. And even though I've now lost a huge amount of my sight, I have no fear about drawing the figure, because my body becomes that figure. And when I'm in the studio and I'm actually drawing, as I'm drawing, I'm trying to sort of show you now physically, I actually use my own body and how I feel as a person to try and interpret that onto my canvases or the artwork I make. Obviously, I'm talking about my own survival, but it becomes very, very boring if you're an artist and you're only ever making something about yourself. And very quickly, I realized I had no wish to make work about myself. And I wanted to instead look at universals, look at the universal human condition, to try and understand how we all live through our lives, how we all try and survive on a daily basis. I grew up abroad with my family, specifically in the Middle East. And so living in a very British environment was not really what we were used to. We were always used to living in a very multicultural society. And for me, looking outwards, it was always about not necessarily just making work in UK, but working with other communities as well. When I was first at art college, I think all of us have this sort of tendency to feel that we have to show that we can actually draw and show that we can actually make something look like what it's supposed to look like. So my first body of work was very photorealist, and it was also very much about capturing specifics. In my heart, I'm absolutely an expressionist. But I think I had to prove to myself that yes, I could do all of those pictures where I get a likeness, where it's photorealist, where I have the skills to be able to draw in a very particular way. And my way of doing this was to go out and find people to actually become my sitters. So it didn't really matter where it was, but I'd go out and I'd like the look of somebody and I'd approach them in the street and then I'd get to know them. We'd go for a coffee. I'd say I'm an artist and I want to make some work. And I'm really interested to find out a little about you, and maybe you'll come and be my model. And you saw at the beginning of the slideshow that there are pictures of various people who became my models, and I created a lot about their lives. Sometimes when you make work, you open a can of worms and you don't know where you're actually going. I met a guy who worked at Brixton Market, a vegetable market stall in Brixton, and I just loved the look of his face. So we went for a coffee together. He must have been about 75 at the time. And we sat down. And what I thought had been somebody who was probably a lifelong vegetable market chap turned out to be a really famous circus performer. So instead of painting any pictures to do with a fruit stall or a vegetable stall and this amazing man, I got taken into the world of the circus. And it actually turned out that this incredible man had actually been a prisoner of war in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, where he witnessed his father and his brothers losing their lives in the camp in a very tragic, awful way. And hearing his story and hearing how he'd survived the next 60 years, because he was very young, his family were touring with the circus at the time. And that's how when war broke out, and that's how they ended up in the Japanese prisoner of war camp. But I realized through understanding this amazing man that actually I'm a narrative artist and I want to tell people's stories. So from that point, I have always looked to try and find either communities or individuals and to try and find my way into their subject so that I can show just a glance of what it is for them to live their lives. And those subjects have taken me to Palestine, where I've worked with many different communities in Palestine. As a disabled person, I'm obviously quite often working with disabled people. That's because I really believe in human rights issues and making sure that every single person has the opportunity to have a voice within our society. So if I collaborate with other disabled individuals and individuals that might not have been able to have a voice like I have, I can somehow facilitate the potential for them to find their voice and for them to have a voice and be able to live as fulfilling life as they can within their community. In different societies and communities that I go to, disability is sometimes not even on the agenda. So by actually putting the focus directly onto my artistic colleagues, or sometimes they're not necessarily artists, they're just people that I'm working with who are very interested in art, want to participate, it means that they get a spotlight and then their voices are heard. I worked with an extraordinary group of women through Kvinna to Kvinna, who are a Swedish organization working all across the world, but specifically with women's issues. And this group of women that I met, they're the Bereaved Women's Group in Jerusalem. Most of them have lost family members due to the conflict. And I joined them to come together with them to actually give them the opportunity to create a piece of work that somehow said something about their loved one and said something about their situation and the lives that they were living. Other projects have taken me to South Africa, where I did a very big project with the Bambanani group. It was an unlimited project for the London 2012 Cultural Olympiad. Some of you will know that there obviously was a huge amount of creativity going on during London 2012, and funding was made available for artists to go into competitions to gain funding. And because Britain began the Paralympic Games in 1948 at Stoke Mandeville, it was decided that this time Britain would make sure that the Paralympics got a very, very big spotlight during London 2012. And with the Cultural Olympiad, it was decided that there should be disabled artistic leaders as well. And I know there's some different people who joined in today. Caroline, I know you're here. We did a really amazing project working together with Paralympic athletes and also disabled artists, and actually going into schools and really looking at issues around disability and empowerment. And you can't ever look at a disabled athlete and necessarily think that they're disempowered, because through their sports, they're incredibly empowered. So the Cultural Olympiad Unlimited Commissions gave theatre practitioners, artists like myself and other people the opportunity to create artwork that said something about the current circumstances of that moment. And I was very lucky, I got one of the unlimited commissions. There were 5 out of 29 international commissions, and I was awarded one of the commissions. And I went and worked with a group of HIV and AIDS survivors in Khayelitsha Township. And you're probably all thinking, well, how did she know about this? Well, I went to Cambridge about a year before that, and I saw a body map. And actually, I think Tim can flick around, and there's sort of some body map type pictures that are emerging in my studio, which are a completely different subject, but that's from the same starting point. And I saw a body map, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a body map, which is basically an image where you lie on the ground, somebody traces around you, and from that story point, your story can emerge. It's the trace of who you are. Nobody else will have the same body map as you. I thought I was huge and tall until I did a body map, and I realized actually I only look about that big, not because I'm thin or anything, but because, you know, I don't take up that much space on a big sheet of paper. But it's the moment you can tell your story. And in this very particular body map, the lungs were bandaged. And I just knew as I stood looking at this picture that whoever painted that painting had the same understanding as I had about being able to breathe. I had no idea where she was or he was. I thought it was a woman, but I really didn't know anything about this picture, and we were going on somewhere else. And anyway, I couldn't get the picture out of my head, and I came home and I started Googling, as we all do, you know, who's done this picture, and didn't know who it was. And then I found that there was a book in Australia that cost me about £80 to be sent via eBay. And I had it sent and could see a few more names. So I started Googling those names. And literally after about, I don't know, hundreds of emails, one day I came downstairs to my computer and it just said, "I'm Nondamiso Hawili, and I've heard you're looking for me." And so that was the beginning of the story. And luckily for me, the Unlimited funders decided that they'd find a way for us to get together and work together. Nondamiso was one of originally 15 or 16 people in the Bambanani group. They're all from the Eastern Cape and had travelled to Kailicha Township, really mainly for work purposes, so that they could get jobs. And most of them had, for whatever reason, various reasons, began to get tuberculosis, which is obviously just an illness that comes from HIV and AIDS. And at the time it was 2001 and there was no medical treatment, which meant that they were all told to go home and basically die. Now, as some of you know, I'm kept alive by a syringe driver that is injecting me every single minute to keep me breathing. Now, with my syringe driver and the National Health Service, which at the moment we're all incredibly grateful for, I'm able to survive. But for many people around the world, medical health and being able to have a good medical support is not available. So the premise of my particular project was everyone throughout the world should be able to have medical treatment, whatever your circumstances are. And that was how I came together with the Bambanani group. Our cultures couldn't be more different, but as soon as we were in that room together, it was quite clear we were going to be friends forever, and that we all had a sense of being able to stay alive. Lucky for the Bambanani group, Médecins Sans Frontières went into the township about 2001, took one of the shacks and started giving out free antiretroviral treatment. And the Bambanani group were lucky to receive each of the different individuals to get some of the first treatment. And they became the voice of that treatment and worked with Cape Town University, creating body maps, but also being storytellers to go out into the community and to be able to tell other people, don't be scared of what's happening in the shack, go and get treatment because you're going to survive. Because people were fearful. And many of us now are very fearful of what's happening with coronavirus. I have antibody treatments every 2 weeks that are actually giving me antibodies because I don't have any. They're human transplant antibodies. And I know that at the moment, I'm very unlikely to be able to come out of isolation at all until, not even if there's a vaccination, because I won't build any antibodies, but until this whole area around the virus becomes safe. So what does that do to you and your psychological disposition? You've got two ways to go. You can say, I can make work about it. I can say something creative about it, or I can hide away. And I make no judgment about how all of us decide to run our lives. But for me, what's always important is to be able to shine a spotlight on these issues so other people understand, other people can feel that their voices are heard. And for me, it's really important to be able to share those experiences with my other collaborators around the world. So my small, tiny voice becomes a bigger voice, and other people have the opportunity to say something. So that's why I've ended up collaborating with so many different communities. There's been lots of times because of my medical condition that, I've been incredibly isolated. And I've always had television so that I feel as if I'm part of this outside world. So maybe there's also a really great sense that through my art, I've been able to carry on a dialogue when maybe I couldn't go outside the house. In November, I had a very major spinal cord surgery because I was developing paralysis. And so I had to have a major operation and really struggled to survive from that operation. And just as I thought I was going out into the big wide world again, I got told in February by my consultants, you're going to have to go inside and stay there. So here today, we're all together again. We all have the opportunity to be able to try and understand as artists, what is it that we want to say as artists? Now we know of somebody like Monet. Monet created the most extraordinary flower pictures. And probably there was a long time where I thought, oh, he's really into flowers. He likes landscapes. Until I read an incredible article one day, and I found out that during the First World War, all the troops used to go past the bottom of his garden in Givigny and walk past, and he found it to be the most horrifying thought to think that these young 17, 18-year-old men were going off to war to the Western Front. And so he went into his studio and he created all of the Water Lily series of pictures. And when you first look at the paintings, you just think of them as water lily pictures. But as soon as you know that within the subject matter, there is this whole other narrative going on, it begins to make you understand far more about what is this thing called existence. And so within a lot of my work, I also use metaphor. And when I'm working with vulnerable communities, it's also necessary to talk to them about using metaphor, because we don't want to create graphically tragic images because we don't want to look at them. As humans, it's almost impossible to look at really terrible things on the television. We all know that they're important to see, but actually for our own sense of being, it's too horrifying to be able to see it. So something else that's interested me throughout my career has been how do we tell these stories? How do we say something about the world we inhabit? The particular circumstances that we're living under at the moment are probably nothing any of us have experienced. Our parents passed away about 4 years ago, very close together. And I can only imagine that there is some semblance, as we all found the other day during the 75th anniversary of V-Day, that maybe what they went through is a little bit similar to some of the things that we're going through now. And actually for many of us to be able to understand what it was really like is through reading poetry or through reading books and stories, but also looking at art. So I know that if any of the work that any of us make survives, if we do create work during this time and we can find a way to have a voice through our own creativity, we will find something really precious to say. And what you have to really hold on to is the fact that you have to say it, not somebody else, because nobody actually knows how you feel. And I have no wish to be able to tell somebody's other story or somebody else's story, because that person has to tell their own story. I can give them the means and I can facilitate them and show them this is maybe how you can deal with it, or this is the idea you can start with. But just to give them the tools to start creating or saying something. And I'm really aware at the moment that this time has made people feel very creative and feel maybe for the first time in their lives, actually, I want to make work. But I say that the best art that is made always comes from that place where you're trying to say something. That's where art really matters. And I know, I've drawn and drawn and drawn, and, I've made many terrible drawings. I've probably made many terrible paintings. But it's only through that process of actually finding your way with your materials, with your subject, that eventually you know that on the page you've said something you want to say. And we need to have every different type of art. We need to have all of your art, because we're going to look back next year or the year after that or the year after that and say, that's what happened. And it will happen through creativity. There's probably so much I could say to you about all the different projects I've worked on, but they're on my website. If you Google my name, lots of different projects come up. You can also find various videos. Some of them are on my Facebook page as well. On my Facebook page, but also my website. Recently, I had the incredible opportunity to go and work with Arts and Disability Association in Hong Kong and work with a whole group of Hong Kongian disabled artists, but also artistic leaders and individuals in the community who are also running projects. And while we were there, we actually experienced the problems that they were all going through to do with democracy. And just to get a bit of an understanding of how it is to find that your freedoms may be taken away from you. And that subject came up throughout the few weeks that we were working together. So I know that wherever I go, each community does have something to say and does want to express themselves. So just promise me that you'll find out what you want to say. And during this time of real and incredible instability, that you do say something, because we're all artists. You know, you don't become born an artist. We are just all artists. We're all creative. And some people create through music or whatever it is that you want to create. It doesn't really matter. But actually the true story that will be told will be through that creativity. Yes, there'll be the politics. That really matters. And I'm very interested in politics. But ultimately, the important stories are the stories that you're going to tell. And people will look back, your children, grandchildren, whoever might see those things will say, that's what happened, as we did last week with all the day information, and really got a sense of the people that went through the war. And it said something to all of us about hope, about human fragility, about survival, incredible love affairs, incredible stories that emerged where people liberated some of the camps. I mean, it really was the most moving thing to witness. Of course, none of us ever, I work in conflict as part of my work. It's terrible. There should never be any conflicts, but there are, and they'll continue to happen. But through actually thinking about it here and there gives us an opportunity to understand just that tiny bit more about the human condition. And ultimately, I believe that's why I'm alive and what makes me want to make work. Thanks very much.